Since the beginning of your life, your parents have always told you that school is the most important thing and education always comes first. You're always being told this by your grandparents, like your parents that I mentioned, and everyone around you always tells you that the school is the most important thing to focus on in your entire life, and if you do well in school, you'll do well in life. And I, myself, has officially graduated high school, so I'm about to give you my take on a personal experience from school, the good and the bad and the truth that comes out of my experience as being a high school graduate. So, I started things back off in kindergarten, learning the simple things like the ABCs, the building blocks of my foundation of education, learning how to speak properly, learning how to pronounce specific words in the English language, how to communicate properly, learning my numbers, 1, 2, and 3s, and then, learning a little bit of addition and subtraction, but that was really the basics, and it all kind of starts from there. Then you graduate to your middle school years, and from middle school, it's basically everything just slightly more advanced, and you're starting to learn and get a feel for some of the math of the world. You're learning a little bit of, hopefully, multiplication and division, and you're learning, progressively more important levels of addition and subtraction and all the numbers, and you could probably count to 100 by now. Hopefully you should be able to count to 100. And at middle school you also start to understand a lot more things about the world, and you continue to ask questions, right? Throughout the progress of your life, you're always asking your peers and your elders and your mom and dad questions throughout life, and your teachers, and you're asking more questions, trying to learn more about the world around you. And you just do what you're told at this point. Mom tells you to do this, you do that. Teacher says you got homework, you do the homework. You're not really questioning anything. You don't really have a sense to, rebuttal against the system as most people do in high school. And that's where we're going to go next, is high school. And this is kind of the last big step in your life. So you're starting off as a freshman, fresh meat, as they say. And you're kind of like, in a weird, awkward phase of your life, because you're no longer a true kid in a sense. You're starting to grow up and mature into adult, at least slightly. Like, you're still pretty stupid, but you're like trying to mature into a more adult-like figure. And you're honestly starting to, talk back potentially to your parents and your peers, and you're asking questions, and you might disagree with people. You no longer just agree just to agree. You have your own opinion in a way, and you might become more quiet as you get older, because people just tell you to shut up when you have certain ideas, and they trying to drill a certain pattern into your head. And as you're going through, freshman all the way to senior, you just kind of doing what you're told, but you don't really want to do it, right? Because you feel like there's a different way of life, or you want to do something else with your life rather than school, because you're tired of doing the same old thing of someone's telling you, hey, solve this problem, then you're just going to solve it on a piece of paper, and then you do the same thing for the entire high school semester, your entire life. That's what you've been doing. You've been handed a problem, and they teach you how to solve it, and then they give you a bunch more of these problems, and you just solve them on a piece of paper, hand it in, and do it all again. It's a boring cycle that doesn't really teach you anything. And in high school, a lot of people have finance teachers, which is probably one of the most important subjects in your class. So for those who are still in high school and are learning finance, pay close attention to your finance teacher. However, the problem I have with finance teachers is that a lot of the finance teachers aren't actually rich themselves, and they're not really good at their own finances. And so in that case, and that's the majority of the time, how are you a finance teacher if you don't have like $1 million in the bank? Like, I'm being serious. You want to learn from somebody that's done the thing that they're teaching you, right? Like, if someone's telling you how to become a professional sports athlete in said sport like basketball, you better hope that this guy's at least a college level player at the minimum. Otherwise, I don't want to say they don't know what they're talking about, but they haven't actually done the thing that they're trying to help you do. And that just makes them a little less credible, right? It's easy for a finance teacher to tell you how to do it, but for them not to have any money themselves kind of speaks against itself. So, like I said, in high school, you're learning things that might not be valuable, and you might be having, teachers you don't agree with, and you're starting to rebuke and disagree with what some people say. And obviously now when you're in high school, you have politics and things like that I'm not going to get into, but that's a whole nother story. So you're starting to become your own character, and you're in an awkward stage of trying to grow up and figure out your own life. And maybe your home situation starts to get tough, and you start to see the bigger picture, and then in your mind you might think that life isn't happy and that there's no joy in life anymore. And that's just depression that almost everybody goes through, right? Like, I've been through that. It's pretty much impossible to not go through it. It's just part of the human experience, right? And so that you go through high school, right? And once you get out of high school, which is where I am currently at, you get to finally take a breather, right? Because now you're at a crucial state in your life, or you might think of it as crucial, to where you're like, what's my next step? And if you aren't someone who hasn't graduated, or maybe you are someone who has graduated, rewatch this video so you can get to see a bigger picture of things. But if you're someone that hasn't graduated yet, continue watching this video, because I'm going to show you the bigger picture of things so you can know how to plan in advance for your future. Okay? So, looking back, this is me looking back at high school, getting to reminisce and see what happened in my high school years. There's certain subjects I wish I'd spent more time on and less time on. The ones I wish I'd spent more time on is finance and learning how to manage money, because in the real world, that's a real world thing and a real world problem. Did you know most Americans have less than $1,000 in cash ready to go? Like, they have no money saved for retirement or anything. Okay? So finance, very important. Math to a level is super, super important. However, you don't need to learn how to become a statistics like genius, right? You don't need to be the greatest algebra mind ever. Okay? People who are smart, like Albert Einstein, hated school. Some of the richest people are C+ students. I'm sure you've heard that phrase a lot. They're not the top of the line smartest people in school. They know how to work around the problems and think outside the box. The richest and smartest people think outside the box. Remember that, okay? They think outside the box to solve bigger problems, because the people who are A students think inside the box, how to solve problems, but they only do it in a certain path, in a certain way that has to be done perfectly. Those are like the people who always have to do a thing 100%, The people who are perfectionists, they always have to make it perfect. Those people are good, but they're not as good as the C+ students, because the C+ don't really listen by the rules. They think outside the box. So please remember that, okay? Think outside the box when you're going through life and just difficult problems, okay? It's not always a straight path like the A student wants to tell you, all right? So that's important. Another thing I wish I had learned to do a little bit better is type on a keyboard. I'm pretty good, but typing and then writing papers on a keyboard and learning how to say your thoughts out on a piece of paper and type it in a proper format that is easy for you to understand and the reader, insanely important, very undervalued. Now, something that's a lot less important, okay? Your marine biologies of the world. All your sciences is important. You got to know how certain things work around the world, but in a sense, you don't need to know all the little diagnoses of, what a heart is unless you're going to become a heart surgeon, right? You don't need to know all the, different descriptions of places in the brain, right? Like the frontal lobe and so. Like, I don't even know that because I know it's not important. So it's like I learned it to take the test just to do it, but I don't actually, keep it in my mind because it's not the most important thing in the world. And then, again, important but not really is a foreign language, like Spanish, for example, because that's something a lot of people take. It's cool to have two languages, but honestly, just spending a majority of your time, going to study a foreign language, just pass the test, okay? Don't worry about becoming great at fluently speaking English and Spanish unless you want to become a translator, then, well, duh, obviously that's essential. But it's not the most important thing in the world. That's me looking back at high school. And pretty much every other subject you might have, other than gym and stuff, is pretty much useless. So the most important things in your school life that you could possibly learn are going to be finance, economics, your maths of the world, and then finally your English, and then your typing ability. Those are going to be the most important things, okay? So now after high school, you have a decision, right? You either get to go down a college route, or you go and skip college and you just go straight to job. So there's a difference here. And if you go straight to college, right, you're going to be loaded with a bunch of debt unless you're in a very fortunate situation, or you get to go and choose the job route, which means you just get thrown out there into the world and get a somewhat low-paying job because you're fresh out of high school, so they're not going to pay you, a ton of money. And then most likely work if you go straight out of high school, you're most likely going to be working a hands-on blue-collar job like, welding or something along those lines. And so you gotta just think about your future in that sense. And I'm not credible enough to go any farther than that from a descriptive standpoint, because I am still, like I said, I just graduated high school. But like I said, make sure you think outside the box when looking to your future, and make sure you really think about these important decisions. Thank you.